It all starts with a TV show featuring a badass Swiss policewoman. She explains how this story is about Charlotte and Brandon, who are a perfect match. They, however, have never actually met each other. This is because Charlotte is with Steven and Brandon is with Ashley. In the present, a little boy holds up a candy ring and confesses his love for his favorite teacher, Charlotte. She politely tells him she cannot accept his love because she is marrying someone else. She explains how she has been with Steven for 14 years. She tries to elaborate on how everything will work out for them but stops just in time to remind herself that she is talking to a first grader. Brandon, who is a graphic designer, is trying to negotiate a deal with his client, when Al, his colleague, takes the phone away from him and starts abusing the client and his nephew. Brandon tries to tell Al how this is their biggest client and is paying his student loans and their bills. Al then realizes his mistake and asks if Brandon can call him back. But as it turns out, the client was listening to their conversation all along. Brandon meets his girlfriend Ashley, who asks him about a necklace she left at his place. He tells her he will get it for her. She then discusses how she has tickets to a football game that her boss gave her. Brandon tries to make an excuse to get out of it. Ashley gets irritated and tells Brandon how he has very deep commitment issues and is not ready to go anywhere. She also calls him a cheapskate while he explains that he is just struggling with money. He tries to change her mind, but Ashley is just not interested. Charlotte is out on a hike with her boyfriend Steven and is describing their perfect house. Steven is tired and suggests that they should hold off on the house for a bit. He tells her he just moved there and needs to figure out a lot of things. When Charlotte asks if he is having doubts about them, he tells her he is bored of her because she is too predictable. She tells him she had no idea he thought that way and how all the promises and engagement rings he gave to delay her make a lot of sense after 14 years. Steven apologizes for not breaking up with her sooner, but Charlotte is angry and frustrated. He tells her to calm down and hydrate, but she just throws the drink at him, making him lose his balance and fall from a great height. Charlotte is then charged with criminal assault and is given community service, anger management classes, and 30 days in jail. She gets paired with an angry woman, who scares Charlotte. Meanwhile, Brandon brings coffee and Ashley's necklace to her and finds her with someone else. He exercises on his cycle and Dan tries to calm him down and tell him that he is better off without Ashley. Brandon tells him Ashley was right, and that he has had 50 girlfriends in 10 years because he cannot commit to anything. He tells Dan he wants lasting love and is willing to change for it. Charlotte is out of jail and her friend Carly tries to welcome her from behind. Her prison reflexes kick in, and she punches Carly in the face. With blood coming out of her nose, Carly tells Charlotte how she looks much better now and is stronger. Charlotte jokes about how it just took spending half her life with someone who didn't deserve it to make her strong. Carly tells her to forget all about Steven and get back out there to meet someone. Charlotte says she is too boring for men and they want someone who is more spontaneous. Carly insists that men are not so complex and just want lovemaking, sports, beer, and food, and Charlotte agrees to understand more about all these things. Charlotte and Brandon then separately give themselves a makeover and decide to change their personalities. Charlotte sits down with Carly to get rid of everything Steven gave her. Carly then takes out a vintage Chinese propaganda statue that Charlotte loves and convinces her to give it away. Brandon finds a listing of the statue on eBay with Charlotte's picture. He is impressed and starts sending flirty messages to Charlotte. She remembers she is supposed to be spontaneous and she responds to him. He sends her his photo with cash and decides to buy the statue from her. She mails it to him with her picture and he tells her he is unhappy she did not come with the package. They soon start talking on the phone. Brandon then hears something in the background and they both realize they love the same Swiss policewoman TV show. Charlotte tells Carly about Brandon and how she loves talking to him. She asks if she should tell Brandon about Steven, but Carly tells her to avoid it. Charlotte then decides to pretend to be someone else to impress Brandon. Meanwhile, Dan also tells Brandon to lie a little about his background and not mention the student loans. They keep chatting with each other and pretend to be someone they want to be. While Charlotte pretends she has been with a lot of men and is spontaneous, Brandon pretends that he only has serious relationships with very few women. They both also pretend to love beer and football, which they both hate. She also tells him she is a salsa dancing champion, and on a video call, they pretend to have cooked the food in front of them. They are getting excited with their conversations and he tells her to come to let him meet him. Brandon picks up Charlotte and Dan's Mustang and pretends it is his. He starts showing her places to try and impress her. Charlotte spots a restaurant where celebrities eat and he agrees to go with her. He is aware of how expensive everything is, so he is not able to order much for himself. Charlotte and Brandon are spending a lot of time together and Charlotte, trying to be spontaneous, suggests they should jump in the water. As they come out of the water, Brandon comments on how exciting that was and Charlotte tells him he is the most exciting guy she has met. They then kiss for the first time and she pushes him playfully in the water again. Charlotte and Brandon are preparing to sleep together and while Charlotte tries on some bold lingerie, Brandon is also nervous about making it work with her. They both try and impress each other and Charlotte pretends she likes it rough in bed. Afterward, she tells him she has fallen for him since he is exactly what she was looking for. He tells her she is the most exciting and spontaneous person he has met, and that he loves her. He even gives her Ashley's necklace as a present. When Charlotte goes back, Brandon tells Dan how he feels he is in love with Charlotte. Dan tells her he is happy for him and Brandon hands him her scarf to smell, which Dan thinks is very inappropriate. Charlotte discusses Brandon with Carly and how everything with him seems magical. Carly notices a headline in the newspaper which shows Charlotte's ex Steven, who is called the Fall Guy, engaged to someone else. Charlotte panics and suddenly feels disoriented. Carly is worried as Charlotte puts plates in her purse instead of the dishwasher, and starts washing the necklace instead of the plates, which then falls and gets lost in the garbage disposal. We then see Charlotte putting nails on the newspaper clipping of Steven. Charlotte and Brandon are talking on a video call and he sends her a video he made at work. Charlotte loves the adorable video, which ends with the guy giving the girl a ring. Charlotte feels saying yes to him would be unpredictable, and Brandon feels it will be the biggest commitment, so they agree and get married. The story moves to 10 days after their wedding, when Charlotte and Brandon, who both look disheveled, find a lawyer to ask for a divorce. They tell him how they immediately want a divorce and there are no property disputes they need to discuss. The story then goes back 9 days, right after Brandon and Charlotte get married, and she moved in with him. Brandon's mom, dad, and Carly are sitting with them. Brandon and Charlotte appreciate the gift Carly got for them. Brandon's parents, Jerry and Judy, give them the receipt of a charity they made in their names. Charlotte graciously thanks them and Carly, wanting to change the topic, asks if they have decided on their honeymoon. Charlotte tells her there is a lot to figure out with her new job and getting a bigger apartment. Jerry and Judy insist that Sri Lanka can be the best honeymoon destination. When Charlotte asks what they did for their honeymoon, they reveal how they went to a rally right after they got married, so they had to spend their honeymoon in jail. Jerry describes how even in jail, they used to make love. Brandon is overwhelmed and wants a drink. Charlotte tells them how she wants a big family and children since she is an only child without parents. Brandon keeps getting awkward and tries to change the topic, worrying about how expensive everything sounds. Jerry and Judy then decide to leave for their flight. Carly thinks they are very weird people and is glad they left. Charlotte and Carly discuss how lucky she is that Brandon is not like his parents. Brandon is requesting Dan to lend him his car for a few weeks since Charlotte thinks that is his car. Dan tells him to not keep lying to her even after getting married. Brandon tells him how he is panicking because Charlotte wants a honeymoon and kids and he cannot tell her he is broke. Dan then takes pity on him and agrees to lend him the car for a few more weeks if he can look after it well. Brandon and Charlotte are excited about their dinner with Dan and his wife Rita. Rita tells them a story about how Dan lost their wedding ring during a movie and found it in their drink. Rita also tells Brandon and Charlotte how she loves everything about Dan. Brandon then tells them how he regrets not visiting his grandfather enough when he could, and Charlotte is overcome by emotion and starts kissing him passionately, which makes Dan and Rita a bit awkward. Back home, Brandon asks Charlotte why she does not wear the necklace he got her and she pretends she still has it and will wear it soon. They then watch their favorite Swiss policewoman show and have a good time. The next day, Brandon does not have any work and discusses what can be done with Al. Meanwhile, Charlotte discusses with Carly how she finally found a copy of the necklace Brandon gave her and spent $1,200 on it, but could not tell Brandon the truth. Charlotte and Brandon decide to go cycling since he claims to be a professional, and Charlotte starts suggesting where they can go for their honeymoon. This makes Brandon nervous again and he decides to show Charlotte some bicycle tricks, which he does not have. So he falls off the bike and bruises himself. They then go to the club and as a surprise for her, Brandon arranges for her to perform salsa since she had claimed she was a salsa champion. Charlotte starts dancing and it is painful to watch since it is clear she knows nothing about salsa. Brandon's ex Ashley walks into the bar and calls him a cheapskate as a joke. She goes on to hug Brandon when Charlotte comes and introduces herself as Brandon's wife. Ashley is surprised Brandon got married and notices Charlotte wearing her necklace. She tries to snatch it out of her neck and tells Charlotte how the necklace is hers and she left it at Brandon's place. Ashley then just snatches the necklace and runs away, while Brandon stands there looking confused. Brandon discusses the necklace issue with Dan, who tells him that he needs to make a grand and sweet gesture to win Charlotte back and make her forget about the necklace. Charlotte discusses with Carly how humiliating the incident was and Carly tells her they both have screwed up, so now they should move on. Brandon then sends Charlotte a video apology, which she thinks is very sweet. Carly tells Charlotte to do something nice for Brandon and as soon as he comes in that night, Charlotte jumps on him and they rigorously make love. Afterward, Brandon gets up and shrieks from pain in his groin area. He goes to get it checked with Charlotte, who assures him things will be fine. Brandon gets called into a room where Dr. Sani checks him. She compares it to something she saw in her tropical disease seminar and asks if he has had any exposure to chemicals or had slept with suspicious people without using protection. She goes outside and calls for Dr. Palmer, and even mentions that he could have had a possible STD from sleeping with 21 women in 4 years, which Charlotte also overhears. Dr. Palmer also studies him and is confused, so he brings out a swab to run some tests. Charlotte comes to see him as he rests and shouts at him for lying to her about having slept with so many women. He tells her he always wore condoms except with her, but she tells him she has only been with one man for 14 years. Dr. Dietz then comes for a checkup and tells him he just has honeymoon disease from very intense intimate activity. She tells him to give it a rest for a few days and it will be fine. Brandon looks immensely relieved. Charlotte is excited about starting work as a teacher when Mrs. Halvorson at the school informs her that they received her background check. Charlotte apologizes and promises to be a good teacher, but they decide to terminate her contract because of her felony. Charlotte is upset about her work when Brandon comes to talk to her. He feels she is upset with him, but they both decide to not judge each other and look forward to their future. They then enjoy the moment by watching their favorite TV show. The next morning, Brandon packs lunch for Charlotte, who is overwhelmed and upset about lying to him. She discusses her situation with Carly, who tells her to get another job fast so she can just tell Brandon she got a better offer. Charlotte is still upset since she thinks everyone will vet her and reject her for the felony. She then notices her car is not working, and as she cannot ask Brandon for help, she just heads home and picks up Dan's Mustang, which she thinks is Brandon's, and drives it in a hurry to her interview as Dan watches and gets frustrated. Charlotte's interviewer, Mrs. Newton, is impressed with her work experience and even finds a connection with her. Charlotte is excited, but she knows she needs to be frank, so she confesses about her felony. Mrs. Newton tells Charlotte she appreciates the honesty and will get back to her with their answer. As Charlotte heads out, she notices that Brandon's car is missing and panics. She tries to report the stolen Mustang, but since she has no idea of the license plate, it is of no use. Meanwhile, Al tells Brandon he got a job offer, so he has taken it. Brandon is upset, but Al offers to let him work in his garage. Brandon refuses since he knows he cannot keep using it. Charlotte is frustrated and calls Brandon. Just as he picks up the call, she spots someone driving the Mustang. She shouts for the driver to stop and runs after him. Brandon thinks Charlotte is in trouble and goes to check if she is okay. Charlotte then goes to Dan and tells him how the Mustang was stolen. As Charlotte is panicking, Dan tells her to come with him to see something. Dan shows her the Mustang and tells her he had a GPS tracker on it. Charlotte is excited the car is safe but asks Dan why he installed a GPS. Dan tells her it is his car and Brandon borrowed it to impress her. He also lets it slip that Brandon is broke and has a lot of debt. Meanwhile, Brandon reaches the school where Charlotte was supposed to be teaching and asks for her. They inform her that Charlotte was not chosen because of her felony. Brandon is shocked, but he realizes what Charlotte was hiding. Brandon comes home and casually asks her about the phone call. She makes an excuse and tells him she is fine. He asks about her work and she tells him it was great. She then asks about his work, and he pretends it is going great too. She then reveals she read his mail and knows about his debt. Charlotte is angry and tells him how they now share a lot of debt because they are married. From the topic of sharing, Brandon reveals he knows about the felony, which shocks Charlotte. She tries to explain what happened with her ex-fiancé, but Brandon is furious. They keep fighting and everything they were pretending to be comes out. They both reveal they have understood what all the other person was keeping from them. They admit they made a mistake with each other and decide they want a divorce. This brings them to the 10th day of their wedding when they are sitting with their lawyer. He tells them they can come back next Thursday, when he will have the papers prepared. Brandon asks if it can be done sooner, but the lawyer insists he needs time to prepare the forms. Brandon and Charlotte then fight about where they will stay, and Charlotte refuses to leave the apartment since she gave up everything to be with him. He tells her to at least start contributing in the house, and she storms out of the car, shouting at him. They spend the time after that being cold to each other. Charlotte talks to Carly on the phone, who sympathizes with her. They spend days ignoring each other. While Brandon watches their favorite show on TV alone, Charlotte starts tutoring a child. She also watches the show separately on her laptop. Brandon watches Dan and Rita from his balcony and smiles in sadness. Brandon tries getting new clients to earn more and makes a few calls. When he comes home, gets a surprise from Jerry and Judy, who flew in for his birthday, and tells him about their adventures in Antarctica. Brandon then asks Charlotte to not tell his parents about the divorce since he is embarrassed. She agrees and they all meet for dinner. Jerry and Judy give them 2 tickets to Tahiti for their honeymoon, and Brandon awkwardly thanks them for the gift, and so does Charlotte. They ask them to pose with the tickets and are a little confused by how awkward Charlotte and Brandon are while kissing. Judy talks to Charlotte about what is happening in their lives. Charlotte tells her that they both have lied to each other a lot. Judy tells her about the time she met Jerry and told him something while the truth was something else. She tells Charlotte that one day she came clean to Jerry, and that has been the glue that has held them together ever since. At a little distance, Jerry tries to talk to Brandon, who also seems very upset. Jerry tells him marriage is hard, but he should see if it is worth it. The next morning, Brandon tells Jerry and Judy he has a headache, and Jerry brings out his bag full of different kinds of drugs. Charlotte gets a call from Mrs. Newton from Culver City Charter School, who tells her about a gathering with the board that day, and how Charlotte can come there to impress them and talk about her experience. Charlotte is very excited and grateful, and Mrs. Newton tells her to bring her husband along too. Charlotte tells Brandon to help her and explains how if she gets the job, she will have enough money to move out and they both will be happy. Meanwhile, Jerry listens to their conversation. Charlotte and Brandon reach the gathering and meet Mrs. Newton. She introduces them to the board members, who ask Charlotte about her experience with kids. She excitedly describes how she loves to be around them and how entertaining children can be. Brandon then gets a call and leaves for a bit. Al tells him how he got him a full-time job with him, and Brandon is unbelievably excited. Brandon then goes to Charlotte with a beer, who tells him she does not like it. He reveals he doesn't either. They then notice Jerry and Judy at the party, talking to Mrs. Newton about conservatism. She comes to tell Charlotte how she made a good impression and how amazing her in-laws are. Mrs. Newton then tells her that her daughter Anais is visiting. The daughter in question walks into the party with none other than her husband Stephen, Charlotte's ex. Charlotte is shocked to see him and she gets all the flashbacks of the incidents with him. Stephen pretends to not know her and politely greets her. A waitress hands Charlotte grilled shrimp, and she puts it in her drink and starts stirring, lost in thought. Brandon notices something is wrong with her and comes to check on her. Charlotte keeps walking without knowing what she is doing, and Brandon tries to get her to her senses. Meanwhile, Jerry and Judy come to tell them they know everything and want to help Charlotte get the job. Brandon asks if they are high, and they reply in the affirmative. Charlotte is still shocked by the meeting and is trying to recover in the washroom. Stephen walks in and asks her how she is doing. He tells her he can see she married the first guy she met and that because he hurt her, her life has taken an ugly turn. Meanwhile, Brandon is listening to the conversation from outside the door. She tells Stephen they met on eBay and fell in love. Stephen tries to get close to her and tells her how some of the changes are not bad for her. He tells her he has missed her and then kisses her. Brandon can sense what is happening and is about to leave when he hears Charlotte shouting at Stephen, so he gets his ears back to the door. Charlotte screams at Stephen for wanting her now that she is with someone else. Stephen tells her that his wife Anais is spontaneous and exciting, but he misses Charlotte and the quiet, boring life he had with her. He tells her he did not appreciate her till he lost her. Charlotte is still angry and tells him she will never be with him. When Stephen calls their current partners a mistake, Charlotte stands up for Brandon and tells Stephen how despite their fights, she still loves him more than anyone. Brandon smiles after hearing all this. Stephen tries to hold Charlotte back and get her to kiss him. Charlotte then punches him hard, and he falls. Jerry hands over a check to Mr. Wooster as a donation for their school. He checks the amount and is grateful to them, and goes to tell Mrs. Newton. Judy asks if that check was for Brandon, and Jerry tells her how this can be an investment in both Charlotte and Brandon's future. Brandon asks Charlotte if she meant what she said inside, and she hesitates and tells him she did. Meanwhile, Jerry finds Stephen in the washroom and offers him some first aid, and opens his drug box. Stephen starts hearing voices about being the rightful heir to a throne. The voices tell him to reveal his magnificence to everyone at the school so they know how mighty he is. Mrs. Newton thanks Charlotte for the donations from her in-laws, and she tells her how they can be very generous. Just then, Stephen takes the gathering by storm as he comes out fully naked with paint all over his body. He declares that he is the Unicorn King and they are all his subjects. He commands them to kneel before him, and while some guests are in shock, the others start screaming and running away from him. When Anais tells him to stop the drama, he tells her he is not Stephen anymore, but a king. As he is running around, Brandon just walks up and punches him in the face, making him fall. This is met by applause, and Mrs. Newton continues telling Charlotte how she can join from Monday. Charlotte is thrilled and hugs her and Brandon in excitement. While going back, they discuss what could have possibly happened to Stephen. Brandon and Charlotte meet their divorce lawyer, who is ready with the papers and asks them to sign since no property dispute can stop them. Charlotte hesitates before signing and says she wants the Chinese rocket statue. Brandon refuses to part with it. The lawyer suggests joint custody, but both Charlotte and Brandon refuse to take his suggestions. They tell him not to rush the divorce, and Brandon asks Charlotte if she wants to get lunch. They then ditch the divorce papers and their lawyer and leave. We see Charlotte and Brandon fighting again, and Charlotte slaps him. She apologizes, but Brandon tells her not to worry at all. We then see that at the end of their story, Charlotte and Brandon are role-playing on their honeymoon, running towards the beach and having a good time with each other.